The Cold War, like this kind of cold? Ice? Cold War? No. I got ice on my keyboard. No, not that cold. The Cold War? Like the temperature? No, not that kind of cold. And it's not even cold because it's 75 degrees, and 74 degrees would be cold. Hi, today I'll be talking about the Cold War. But not only will I be talking about the Cold War, I'll be talking about aliens. Now you may be wondering, how are these things related? Well, I will tell you how they are related. So, here's the premise, right? The Cold War, I don't know why it's called a war, let's be real. There wasn't actually any real warfare. It was more like a 40-year long period. People were like really nervous all the time. It's like everybody in America had anxiety disorder. How crazy is that? Anyway, so the Cold War was a period of tension between the United States and the USSR, the Soviet Union, commonly known as Russia, because the US was like, communism is not that cool, and Russia was like, no, it's pretty cool. And so Russia was really like having a fun communist time, and the US was not having it because they had these goods and they wanted to sell them to Russia, and Russia was like, no, we're not about that life. Like, you guys are capitalism, we're not. And then they were like, just cool, okay. And then Russia was like, no, we're gonna do communism, and the US was like, this is not good, freedom is dying, the eagles are dying, like, it's bad. So, this is like a 40-year long period. A lot of tension between the United States and Russia, and also for the people of America, because both countries are developing nuclear weapons. There is the chance of you dying like at any point, and these are pretty powerful nuclear weapons. Like, they've been developing them, and there's just always this constant feeling of there possibly being a war. There's always negotiations happening, and so here we get to the part of the story where I talk about aliens. This might sound like a stretch at first, but around this time of the Cold War, actually, people started, like, really being afraid of the concept of UFOs, unidentified flying objects, mostly because they were so vigilant all the time about looking up at the sky because they were scared they were going to die from a nuclear bomb. Like, people were looking at the sky all the time, and because there were always these government tests happening to develop new weapons, they were, of course, thinking about the possibility of there being, like, extraterrestrial life, right? So the fear of aliens was definitely a thing, and also, Ronald Reagan, who was the president around the end of the Cold War, he was really into sci-fi. He used to be an actor, but then he became the president, which isn't that crazy? Like, people who are, like, formerly, like, in film and TV who become president, amazing. And so he's the president. He's really into sci-fi. He reads a lot of sci-fi books. He does some policy work that's, like, actually pretty, makes references to Star Wars, which is interesting, but he was also scared of aliens, and this kind of, like, became relevant when, at the Geneva Summit of 1985, not the 1955 one, the 1955 one had a lot more people. 1985, it was simply, I cannot pronounce his name, sorry, Gorbachev and Reagan. Gorbachev was the last leader of the USSR, and so they were in the talks and negotiations, obviously, because they both wanted to end the war. You know, it's like the war. You don't want, like, Gorbachev was more interested in domestic policy and fixing things for Russia, not on, like, the global scale. So, of course, like, they're more interested in, like, settling down and being like, okay, we're gonna fix this. And because Gorbachev was more moderate than his he's more moderate than his predecessors, it was a lot easier for him to have a discussion with the American side and kind of, like, come to a conclusion, right? So Gorbachev and Reagan would have these meetings, and the story I'm about to tell you is my favorite one. I'm going to sit down. We're going to make this cinematic. My favorite one, in which they are at this Geneva Summit in Switzerland, which is quite nice, I must add. I wonder if they went skiing or anything. Irrelevant. But they are at the summit, right, and they're trying to negotiate to figure out a way for the US and the USSR to come to an agreement so the Cold War can finally end. And apparently Gorbachev and Reagan stepped outside for a minute. They're in, like, a cabin or something. They step outside. The only people there with them are their interpreters or translators because they do not speak a single language. Brother, if you continue to make noises.
Not making noises.
Mr. Callahan, my brother, is here. Anyway, so they step out of the cabin. So they step out and they're talking. Nobody knew what this conversation was about until years later, but apparently they're both there. And Reagan turns to Gorbachev, and he goes, in the case that extraterrestrial life attacked the world, would we team up? And Gorbachev resoundingly responds, yes, like, without hesitation. And they were seriously thinking about this because Reagan was also so invested in science fiction. Like, this was something that was seriously on his mind, like, without a hint of sarcasm or jokiness. Like, this was a real possibility. And a couple, like, decades before, I believe, the government was already, like, doing things in the case of a possible alien invasion. Which also is kind of funny because, like, if the aliens came, right, would they really want to hang out at our military bases? Like, somebody described it as us going back to see the Romans and then spending all our time looking at their spears. Because if the aliens are here, like, their technology is so far beyond what we have. Like, they're not going to care about our tanks. Anyways. What'd you say, Andre?
I didn't say anything.
Anyways. Oh, also my brother watched your videos and he liked them. He sat there with me and he watched them with me. Anyway, so this idea and this hypothetical of aliens was very real, you know, like they were really invested in it and they were really interested in like preparing for it. And eventually Gorbachev and Reagan were able to come to some kind of agreement. When Bush was really came after, he was able to continue this discussion with Gorbachev. And I mean, it's just interesting the fact that this fear of sudden danger, like at any time, you know, that a bomb could be dropped, that weapons could be tested, that resulted somehow, it manifested in this presence of, this acknowledgement of the possibility of extraterrestrial life, especially because, like, there was one incident where these two, I think they were in the Navy, these two men were near a military base, and they claimed they were in the forest, and they saw this huge flashing light. I watched a video about this on YouTube, and they were just like, it's aliens. Like, they were like, it is aliens. And, I mean, I don't blame them for being hypervigilant about the sky, but of course when things are unexplainable, the easiest thing to presume is that they're aliens. And I'm glad to know that if there were aliens in the 80s, that we would have been safe because Russia would have been there for us. I think that's kind of beautiful. But yeah, that's my Cold War story. Andre, come on in. Yes, I'm excited to bring you my boomers story next week.